The Grand Convocation Chamber was the largest room ever built by any species in the known galaxy. It hung in the empty space around a dead star called Valtherus Prime, a spinning wheel of metal and glass that stretched wider than most moons. Inside it, rising up in rows that seemed to go on forever, sat the representatives of over 400 alien species. Some were tall and thin like needles. Some were made of living crystal. Some floated in tanks of colored liquid. Some had no bodies at all and existed only as patterns of light projected onto their seats. Together, they were the Galactic Council, and they had ruled the stars for longer than human civilization had existed. At the very bottom of this enormous room, standing on a small circle of white light no bigger than a dinner table, was a single human woman. Her name was Alara Voss. She was 53 years old. She had dark hair streaked with gray, sharp brown eyes, and the kind of face that looked like it had been carved out of something hard. She wore a simple black suit with a small blue pin on her collar that showed the flag of the United Earth Coalition. She carried no weapons. She had no guards. She stood alone on that little circle of light with 400 species looking down at her from every direction, and she did not look afraid. She was afraid, of course. She would have been a fool not to be. But she had learned a long time ago that fear was something you kept on the inside. Ambassador Voss had come to this place to ask a simple question. Humanity had been traveling between the stars for 60 years now. They had colonies on Mars and Titan. They had built stations in the asteroid belt. And they had developed their own crude version of faster-than-light travel by studying the engine of a crashed alien probe. And now they wanted what every spacefaring species eventually wanted. They wanted to join the Galactic Council. The process was supposed to be a formality. You showed up. You presented your case. You agreed to the standard rules. You got a seat. Every species that had ever reached the stars had done it this way. It was simple. It was routine. It was not going to be routine today. The first sign of trouble came from the Melkari delegate, a tall being that looked like a praying mantis made of blue glass. It rose from its seat high above and spoke in a voice that the translation system turned into flat, emotionless English. The Melkari consensus has reviewed the application of the species known as humans, it said. We have concerns. Voss kept her face still. We are happy to address any concerns, she said. Your species has existed for approximately 300,000 years, the Melkari said. In that time, you have fought over 40,000 wars among yourselves. You have developed weapons capable of destroying your own planet. You have driven countless other species on your homeworld to extinction. You have polluted your atmosphere, poisoned your oceans, and repeatedly come within moments of annihilating your entire civilization. The Melkari paused. And you wish to join us? A ripple went through the chamber. Voss could not tell if it was agreement or amusement. With 400 alien species, it was hard to read the room. Humanity has made mistakes, Voss said carefully. We do not deny that. Hey, but we have also learned from those mistakes. We have united our world. You have not united your world, another voice cut in. This one came from the Urathi section, where a cluster of floating gas beings pulsed with orange light. You still maintain separate nations, separate governments, separate military forces. You cannot even agree among yourselves on basic matters of resource distribution. How can you be trusted to participate in galactic affairs? Diversity of governance is not a weakness, Voss said. It is. It is chaos, said another delegate, and another, and another. For the next 2 hours, species after species rose to speak against humanity's application. Some were polite about it, some were not. The Velthari, who communicated through patterns of bioluminescent light, flashed a sequence that the translator rendered as dangerously unstable. The Kreth, a species of massive stone-like beings who had not fought a war in 6 million years, simply said no and sat back down. The Jalindri, who were so old that they had watched Earth's first fish crawl onto land, delivered a lengthy speech about how humanity reminded them of a species called the Rethgar, who had burned themselves out of existence 10 million years ago. Through all of it, Voss stood on her little circle of light and listened. She answered when she could. She stayed calm when the insults came. She kept her hands still at her sides and her voice steady and her chin up. She was the only human being within 1,000 light years, and she represented every single one of her kind. And then Overmind Chelvithus spoke. The Thorellan hegemony sat at the very top of the chamber, in a section that was larger and more elevated than any other. The Thorellans were an insectoid species, each one about the size of a large dog, with gleaming black shells and too many legs and eyes that glowed with a faint green light. But individual Thorellans did not matter much. They were a hive mind, thousands of bodies, one consciousness. And the consciousness that led them all, the Overmind, was the single most powerful political entity in the galaxy. Chelvithus did not stand. It did not need to. When it spoke, every other voice in the chamber went silent. Its words came through the translator as something cold and precise, like a machine reading a death sentence. The council has heard sufficient testimony, Chelvithus said. The application of the human species for membership is denied. Voss had expected this. She had prepared for this. But hearing it spoken out loud in that enormous room, with the weight of the entire galaxy pressing down on her, still hurt more than she had thought it would. She took a breath. May I ask on what grounds? On the grounds that your species is unfit, Chelvithus said. You are violent, fractured, unpredictable, and dangerously creative. You do not conform to the established patterns of civilized development. You are, in the assessment of this council, a threat. The word hung in the air like smoke. However, Chelvithus continued, the council is not without mercy. We recognize that your species is young. You may yet be guided toward acceptable behavior. Therefore, we offer you an alternative to full membership. Voss felt something cold settle in her stomach. What alternative? The compliance protocols. The chamber stirred. Several delegates shifted in their seats. A few of the younger species exchanged glances that even Voss could read as uncomfortable. Under the compliance protocols, Chelvithus said, your species will surrender all military vessels and weapon systems to the Council for disposal. Your population will undergo neural harmonization, a process that will reduce aggressive impulses and suppress destabilizing tendencies such as excessive individualism and creative deviance. A Thorellan guidance caste will be installed on your homeworld to oversee your development for a probationary period of 500 standard years. At the end of this period, your application for membership will be reconsidered. The silence that followed was absolute. 400 species held their breath, or their equivalent of breath. Voss stood very still on her circle of light. She felt the blood drain from her face and then come rushing back. Neural harmonization. She knew what that meant. The council had used it before, on species that were too troublesome, too different, too alive. It rewired the brain. It did not kill you. It did something worse. It made you compliant. It took away the fire, the stubbornness, the anger, the wild creative spark that made you who you were, and it replaced it with obedience. The species that underwent harmonization still existed, technically. They just stopped being interesting. They stopped being themselves. 500 years of alien overseers watching every move humanity made. 500 years of being someone else's pet project. And after all that, they would only reconsider the application. Not approve it. Reconsider it. Voss looked up at the Overmind. Those glowing green eyes looked back at her without warmth, without cruelty, without anything at all. To Chelvithus, this was not personal. Humanity was simply a problem to be managed. And if we refuse? Voss asked. Her voice was quiet, but the chamber's acoustics carried it to every seat. 400 species heard her. Several of them flinched. Chelvithus did not flinch. If you refuse, you will be exiled. A barrier wall will be erected around your solar system. It will prevent all faster-than-light travel in or out. You will have no trade, no communication, no contact with any other species. You will be sealed within your own system until such time as the Council determines you have matured sufficiently to reconsider the compliance protocols. There will be no appeal. How long? Voss asked. As long as necessary. Centuries. Millennia. It does not matter. The galaxy is patient. You will learn, or you will be forgotten. Voss looked around the chamber. 400 species, 12,000 years of galactic civilization, the most powerful political body in the history of the universe. And they were all looking at her, this one small human woman on her one small circle of light, waiting to see what she would do. Some of them looked at her with pity, some with contempt, some with a kind of distant curiosity, the way a scientist might look at a lab animal that had done something unexpected. One, a very few, looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. None of them spoke up for her. Not one. Voss thought about Earth. She thought about the 8 billion people she represented. She thought about her daughter, who was 14 years old and wanted to be an astronaut. She thought about what neural harmonization would do to that girl, to that dream every human had ever had or ever would have. She thought about what it meant to be human, not the wars and the pollution and the mistakes. Those were real, and she would not pretend they were not. But also the music, the art, the stubborn, stupid, magnificent refusal to give up even when everything was lost. The way humans climbed mountains for no reason, built cathedrals that took centuries to finish, wrote love letters and symphonies and bad poetry, and punched above their weight in every fight they had ever been in, kept going when any sensible species would have stopped. She thought about all of that, and then she made her decision. It was not a difficult decision. It was the easiest decision she had ever made. "Overmind Kelvithus," she said. Her voice was steady. It did not shake. It did not waver. It filled that enormous chamber like a bell. "On behalf of the United Earth Coalition, and on behalf of every human being alive, I must respectfully decline the compliance protocols." The chamber erupted. Voices from 100 species overlapped in shock, disbelief, outrage. Kelvithus raised a limb, and silence fell again. "You understand the consequences," the Overmind said. It was not a question. "I do. You will be sealed behind the barrier wall. You will be alone. And you will have nothing." "We will have ourselves," Voss said. "That has always been enough." Kelvithus stared at her for a long moment. Those green eyes flickered, processing, calculating. Then the Overmind spoke one final time. "So be it." The session was over. Voss was escorted out of the chamber by 2 Thorellan guards who did not speak to her and did not look at her. She walked through corridors of alien metal under alien lights, past alien beings who stepped aside to let her pass, and she did not look back. She boarded her shuttle alone. She flew back to Earth alone. And as she crossed the threshold of human space, she felt it happen. A shudder ran through the fabric of space itself, a deep vibration that rattled the hull of her shuttle and made her teeth ache. The barrier wall was activating. On Earth, people stopped what they were doing and looked up. The sky was wrong. A faint violet light was spreading across the heavens, shimmering like oil on water. It was beautiful in a terrible way. It lasted for 3 days, and then it was gone, and the sky looked normal again, but everything had changed. The signals from the Galactic communication network went dead. The trade ships that had been en route to Earth turned around. The few alien merchants who had been doing business in the solar system packed up and left through special one-way corridors in the wall. Within a week, every trace of alien contact had vanished. Humanity was alone. The news spread fast. People reacted in different ways. Some panicked, some raged, some wept. Governments held emergency sessions. Military leaders demanded action. So scientists scrambled to understand the barrier wall. Religious leaders called for prayer. Ordinary people held each other and wondered what would happen next. Ambassador Ilara Voss returned to Earth to a world in chaos. She was summoned before the United Earth Coalition's Emergency Assembly, where hundreds of politicians and military leaders shouted questions at her. What had she done? Why had she refused? How could she make this decision for all of humanity? Did she not understand what she had condemned them to? Voss stood at the podium and waited for the shouting to stop. It took a long time, but eventually it did, because even angry people run out of breath. "I know you are afraid," she said. "I am afraid too. I know you are angry. You have every right to be. But I want you to understand something. I want you to understand what they were asking us to give up." She told them about the compliance protocols. She told them about neural harmonization. She told them what it did and what it had done to other species. She told them about the guidance cast and the 500 years of supervision and the fact that even after all of that, membership was not guaranteed. They were not asking us to join them, she said. They were asking us to stop being human. They were asking us to hand over our minds, our freedom, our identity, everything that makes us who we are, in exchange for the privilege of being allowed to exist in their galaxy on their terms. And I could not do that. I will not apologize for that, because being human is not our weakness. It is the only thing we have that no one else in that galaxy possesses. Mona and I would rather be locked in a cage with my mind intact than walk free as someone else's puppet. The assembly was quiet for a long time after that, and then, slowly, someone started clapping, and someone else joined in, and someone else. It built like a wave, crashing through the chamber until every person in the room was on their feet, and the sound of it was like thunder. That night, someone painted 3 words on the wall of the United Earth Coalition headquarters in Geneva. By morning, those words had spread to every city on Earth, to every colony on Mars and Titan, to every station in the asteroid belt. They appeared on walls and signs and screens and shirts. They became a greeting and a battle cry and a prayer. 3 words written in paint that dripped like blood. Never kneel again. Humanity did not know what was coming. They did not know how long the exile would last. They did not know if they would survive it. But they knew one thing, one single burning truth that settled into their bones and would not let go. They would rather die on their feet than live on their knees. And that, as the galaxy would eventually learn, made all the difference. The first year was the worst. When the barrier wall sealed humanity inside its own solar system, it did not just cut off communication. It cut off trade. And humanity had grown dependent on that trade in ways that most people had not understood until it was gone. Alien alloys that were used in construction vanished from the supply chain. Exotic fuels that powered the newest generation of spacecraft became impossible to get. Medical compounds that treated diseases unique to off-world colonists dried up overnight. The economy, which had been slowly integrating with galactic markets for 2 decades, went into free fall. Factories closed. Supply lines collapsed. Prices for basic goods tripled, then tripled again. On Mars, the colony of New Helsinki nearly failed when its atmospheric processors broke down, and the replacement parts, which were manufactured using alien polymers, could not be sourced. 300 people almost suffocated before engineers figured out how to jury-rig a solution using materials they could actually find. On Titan, the situation was worse. The Moon's colony had been almost entirely dependent on alien technology for its heating systems. When those systems began to fail, the colony had to be partially evacuated. 17 people died during the evacuation when a transport shuttle lost power in Titan's freezing atmosphere. So on Earth, riots broke out in 14 major cities. Governments blamed each other. Political alliances that had held together for decades fractured overnight. 3 small wars erupted in regions that had been stable for a generation. The United Earth Coalition, which had been the closest thing humanity had to a unified government, nearly dissolved. It was, by any measure, a disaster. And then something happened. Something that the Galactic Council, with all its 12,000 years of wisdom, had not predicted and could not have understood even if someone had explained it to them. Humanity got angry. Not the kind of anger that burns hot and fades fast. Not riot anger or war anger, or the anger of people looking for someone to blame. This was something deeper, something older. It was the cold, quiet, patient anger of a species that had been told it was not good enough and had decided to prove the universe wrong. It started small. In a laboratory in Buenos Aires, a materials scientist named Davi Correa looked at the broken alien alloy samples that were all he had left of galactic trade, and instead of mourning what he had lost, he asked a different question. He asked what these alloys were made of. He asked how they worked, and he asked whether he could make something better. Within 6 months, his team had developed a new class of composite materials that were not as elegant as the alien originals, but were stronger, cheaper, and could be manufactured using nothing but resources found in the solar system. Within a year, those composites were being used in everything from spacecraft hulls to medical implants. Within 2 years, they were better than the alien alloys had ever been. This was the pattern. Everywhere in every field, the same thing happened. The loss of alien technology did not cripple humanity. It set humanity free. For 20 years, human scientists and engineers had been using alien tools without fully understanding them. They had been consumers, not creators. The barrier wall changed that. Now they had no choice but to understand everything from the ground up. And humans, it turned out, were very, very good at understanding things from the ground up. The man who saw this pattern most clearly was Constantine Arady. Arady was 51 years old when the barrier wall went up. He was a former military officer turned administrator, a tall man with a shaved head and calm gray eyes who had the rare ability to see the big picture without losing track of the details. Before the exile, he had been running a mid-level logistics division for the Earth Coalition. Nobody important, nobody famous. Just a man who was very good at getting things done. 3 months after the exile began, when the world was still in chaos, Arady wrote a document. It was only 12 pages long. He sent it to every government leader, military commander, and scientific institution on Earth, Mars, and Titan. He called it the Soul Advancement Initiative. The document said, in simple and direct language, that humanity had two choices. It could spend its time trying to survive inside the cage, getting smaller and weaker with every passing year, or it could use the cage as a workshop, build itself into something the galaxy had never seen before, and break out. Arady proposed a global effort, the largest cooperative project in human history. Every nation, every colony, every research institution, every corporation, every individual with something to contribute, all working toward a single goal. Not just survival, escape. People thought he was insane. The barrier wall was built by a civilization that had existed for 12,000 years. It bent the fabric of space itself. How could humanity, locked inside its own tiny solar system with its crude technology, possibly break through something like that? Arady had an answer for that too. He said he did not know how. Not yet. But he knew that humanity had gone from horse-drawn carriages to nuclear weapons in less than 50 years. He knew that every time someone told humans something was impossible, they treated it as a challenge. And he knew that the Galactic Council had made one critical mistake. They had locked the most stubborn species in the galaxy inside a box with nothing to do but think. It took 2 years for the Soul Advancement Initiative to become a reality. There were political fights, funding disputes, arguments about priorities. Some nations refused to participate. Some demanded too much control. It was messy and slow and frustrating, and Arady spent most of those 2 years in meetings that made him want to scream. But eventually, piece by piece, it came together. And once it did, the results were extraordinary. The first major breakthrough came in energy. Human fusion technology had been functional but inefficient before the exile. When without access to alien fuel supplements, engineers were forced to redesign the entire system from scratch. A team in Kyoto led by a young physicist named Dr. Yuki Tanaka developed the microfusion reactor, a device the size of a shipping container that could power a small city. Within 5 years, energy was essentially free. Every colony, every station, every ship in the solar system had more power than it could use. The second breakthrough came in manufacturing. With unlimited energy and limited resources, humanity needed to get much better at using what it had. The answer was von Neumann machines, self-replicating robots that could mine asteroids, process raw materials, and build copies of themselves. The first generation was clumsy and slow. The second generation was better. By the third generation, humanity had swarms of millions of tiny machines chewing through the asteroid belt and turning dead rock into everything from hull plating to microprocessors. The solar system became a factory. Mars was fully colonized within 15 years. Not the handful of pressurized domes that had existed before the exile, but real cities, sprawling complexes buried beneath the Martian surface, home to millions of people. Titan followed, then Europa, then Ganymede. Humanity spread across its solar system like water filling cracks in stone, finding a way into every space that could sustain life and making it work. And through all of this, Dr. Yuki Tanaka was working on the real problem. Tanaka was 32 when the barrier wall went up. She was small, quiet, and had the kind of mind that saw connections where other people saw nothing. Like she had been studying theoretical physics at the University of Tokyo, working on esoteric questions about the nature of space-time that nobody thought would ever have practical applications. The barrier wall changed that, because the barrier wall was underneath all its terrifying power, a piece of physics. It was a machine that manipulated space-time in very specific ways, and Tanaka realized something that no one else had noticed. The Council had not just built a wall around humanity, they had built a textbook. The barrier wall worked by folding dimensions in on themselves, creating a kind of knot in space-time that prevented faster-than-light travel. To most scientists, this was simply an obstacle to be overcome. To Tanaka, it was a demonstration. It showed her exactly how dimensional folding worked, in precise, measurable detail. Every fluctuation in the wall, every ripple in its surface, every tiny variation in its gravitational signature was data. And Tanaka was very good at reading data. She spent 10 years studying the wall. She built instruments that could measure its properties down to scales smaller than atoms. She mapped every fold, every twist, every wrinkle in the fabric of space-time that the wall created. And piece by piece, she began to understand not just how the wall worked, but how to do something the Council had never imagined. The Galactic Council used lane-based FTL travel. Their ships moved through fixed corridors in space like trains on tracks. The lanes had been mapped and maintained for thousands of years. They connected every major system in the galaxy. If you wanted to go somewhere, you used a lane. If there was no lane, you did not go there. The system was efficient, reliable, and completely under the Council's control. Tanaka's breakthrough was different. By studying how the barrier wall folded space, she figured out how to fold space herself, not along fixed lanes, but anywhere. Point to point, any origin, any destination. No lanes, no corridors, no tracks. Just a fold in space-time that brought two distant points together for a brief moment, long enough for a ship to step through. She called it the Slip Space Drive. The first prototype was built in a laboratory on Ceres, the largest body in the asteroid belt. It was ugly and crude and barely worked. The first test moved a basketball-sized probe exactly 1 meter through folded space. Tanaka's team cheered like they had won a war. And in a way, they had. When it took another 5 years to scale the technology up to something that could move a ship. During that time, Arata made a decision that would shape everything that came after. He ordered the construction of a fleet, not a defensive fleet, not a scientific fleet, a war fleet. Arata was not a violent man. He did not want war, but he understood something that many others did not. When humanity broke through the barrier wall, the Council would notice. And the Council would not be happy. A species that was supposed to be locked away forever, suddenly free and roaming the galaxy with a drive system that the Council did not have and could not control, that was not something the Council would accept quietly. Humanity needed to be ready. The fleet was built in the deep asteroid belt, in a region so dense with rock and dust that it was effectively invisible to any outside observation. Even if the Council had sensors capable of penetrating the barrier wall, they would have seen nothing but asteroids. Behind that curtain of stone, von Neumann machines worked around the clock, eating rock and turning it into warships. They were not large ships. Humanity did not have the resources or the experience to build the massive dreadnoughts that the Council's senior species favored. Instead, they built something different. Small, fast, agile ships designed around the Slip Space Drive. Ships that could appear anywhere, strike hard, and vanish before the enemy could react. Ships that did not depend on a central command structure, but could operate independently, each one a self-contained fighting unit with its own manufacturing bay, in its own weapons systems, and a crew trained to think for themselves. They called them Wraith-class corvettes, and they built hundreds of them. Alongside the warships, they built colony ships, big, slow, sturdy vessels packed with everything a group of humans would need to start a new civilization on a new world. Prefabricated habitats, agricultural systems, medical facilities, libraries containing the sum total of human knowledge. These ships were not weapons, they were seeds. Together, the warships and colony ships formed the Exodus fleet, 200 combat vessels and 1,000 colony ships hidden in the dark between the rocks waiting. The final test came in the 49th year of exile. Tanaka, now in her 80s but still sharp, still driven, supervised the operation personally. A single probe, no bigger than a football. Aaron was loaded with sensors and a miniature slip-space drive. Its mission was simple: punch through the barrier wall, appear in open galactic space, record 1 second of data, return. The probe launched from Ceres at 3 in the morning, local time. Tanaka and her team watched from a control room buried deep inside the asteroid. The room was small and cold and crowded with equipment. Nobody spoke. The probe accelerated toward the barrier wall. On the screens, they could see the wall as a shimmering distortion in space, a boundary that should have been impossible to cross. The probe hit the boundary and activated its slip-space drive. For one terrible moment, nothing happened. And then the probe was gone. Not destroyed, not deflected. Gone. Through the wall, into open galactic space. The first human-made object to leave the solar system in 49 years. 1 second later, it was back. Its sensors were full of data, stars, systems, empty space, the galaxy, spread out and waiting, and no sign that anyone had noticed. The control room erupted. People screamed and cried and hugged each other. Tanaka sat down in her chair and stared at the data on her screen and said nothing for a long time. Then she smiled, a small, tired, triumphant smile, and said, "It works." The news spread through the solar system in hours. Director Arady, now 80 years old and using a cane, addressed the commanders of the Exodus fleet from the bridge of the fleet's flagship, a ship that the builders had named Defiance. He looked out at the faces on the screens before him. Young faces, mostly. When these were people who had been born inside the cage, who had never known anything but the barrier wall and the silence beyond it. They had trained their whole lives for this moment. 50 years ago, Arade said, the Galactic Council told us that we were not good enough. They told us that we were too violent, too stubborn, too wild. They locked us in a cage and expected us to wither away. They expected us to come crawling back, begging to be harmonized, begging to be made into something quiet and obedient and small. He paused. They forgot something important about human beings. He leaned forward, and his gray eyes were bright and fierce in his old face. They locked us in a cage, he said. They forgot that cages make animals clever. And we were never animals. We were engineers, we were builders. We were the species that looked at the moon and said, "We are going there." We were the species that split the atom because someone told us it could not be done. We were the species that refused to stay small. He straightened up. The wall is still standing. The council still thinks we are trapped. They do not know about the slip space drive. They do not know about this fleet. They do not know that 50 years of exile did not break us. It made us stronger. It made us better. It made us ready. He looked at each face on the screens, one by one. When you go through that wall, you will be the first humans to walk among the stars in half a century. You will carry with you everything we are, our courage, our stubbornness, our creativity, our refusal to kneel. You will go out into that galaxy, and then you will build something that no one can take away from us. Not the council, not the Thorellans, not anyone. The old man smiled, and in that smile was every year of struggle, every setback, every sleepless night, every small victory that had brought them to this moment. They wanted compliance, he said. We chose the stars instead. And somewhere in the deep asteroid belt, hidden from the eyes of the galaxy behind a wall of stone and silence, 200 warships and 1,000 colony ships powered up their engines for the first time. The hum of their drives filled the darkness like a heartbeat, like a promise, like the sound of a cage door opening. The first colony ship slipped through the barrier wall on a Tuesday. Nobody on the other side noticed. That was the point. Fleet Admiral Idris Okonkwo had spent 2 years planning the exit strategy, and he had planned it the way humans did everything. Carefully, thoroughly, and with a backup plan for every backup plan. The fleet would not punch through the wall in one dramatic burst. Instead, it would leak through in small groups, a few ships at a time, spread out over months. Each group would jump to a different destination, all of them chosen for the same reason. Nobody else wanted them. The Galactic Council had been mapping and claiming star systems for 12,000 years. Every system with a comfortable planet. Every system with easily accessible resources. Every system that was remotely pleasant to live in had been claimed long ago. But the galaxy was enormous, and there were countless systems that the Council had looked at and dismissed. Too hot. Too cold. Too much radiation. Too far from the trade lanes. Not enough metal in the asteroids. Atmosphere too thin or too thick or too poisonous. The galaxy was full of places that alien species had examined, shrugged at, and moved on from. Humans moved in. The first colony was established on a planet that the Council surveys had classified as marginally habitable, no strategic value. It was a rocky world orbiting a dim red star on the very edge of explored space. The atmosphere was thin and acidic. The surface temperature averaged -20 degrees. The soil was almost entirely iron oxide. The Council had given it a number and forgotten about it. The humans named it New Carthage. Within a month, they had pressurized habitats up and running. Within 3 months, they had underground farms producing food. Within a year, they had a functioning city of 10,000 people, a spaceport, and a manufacturing complex that was churning out parts for the next wave of construction. Governor Lena Vasquez, a woman who had been an urban planner on Mars before volunteering for the Exodus, ran the colony with the kind of practical efficiency that came from a lifetime of making things work in places where they should not have worked. The Council would not have believed it. Their own species, most of them, needed centuries to establish a colony on a friendly world. Humanity did it on a hostile one in months. This was the thing about humans that the Council had never understood and never would. Humans did not need comfortable conditions. They needed a problem to solve. Give them a problem, and they would tear it apart with their bare hands if they had to. I give them a rock, and they would build a city on it out of sheer stubbornness. New Carthage was the first. It was not the last. Over the next 15 years, colony ships fanned out across the galactic frontier and established settlements on 47 worlds. Each one was a world that the Council had rejected. Each one became a thriving human outpost. They built on frozen moons and scorched deserts and planets where the rain was mildly corrosive. They built in asteroid fields and on the surfaces of dead comets and in the hollow insides of captured planetoids. They built everywhere, and they built fast, and they called themselves the diaspora. The key to their survival was the slip space drive. Without it, the colonies would have been isolated from each other, too far apart to trade or communicate or support one another. With it, now they were connected. A ship could jump from New Carthage to the colony on Ashfall, 200 light years away, in less than a minute. Supplies, people, and information flowed between the colonies like blood through veins. The diaspora was not a collection of isolated outposts. It was a single civilization, spread across hundreds of light years, but bound together by a technology that the rest of the galaxy did not have. Admiral Okonkwo enforced strict rules about secrecy. No colony was to make contact with alien species. No ship was to be seen near Council shipping lanes. All communication was to be routed through encrypted slip space channels that could not be intercepted. The diaspora was to be invisible. For a while it worked. The first crack in the wall of secrecy came not from human carelessness, but from alien desperation. A Tradeclaw Rethus was a Sarathi merchant. The Sarathi were a reptilian species, tall and lean, with scales that shifted color with their mood and long, clever fingers that gave them their trade names. They were not one of the Council's important species. They had no military to speak of, no political influence, and no particular technological achievements. What they had was ships and a talent for buying things cheaply in one place and selling them expensively in another. Rethus was not a successful merchant. His ship was old, his cargo was usually whatever he could afford, and his luck was consistently bad. On the day that changed his life, he was running from pirates. 3 ships were chasing him through the outer frontier, and his engine was failing, and his shields were down, and he was fairly certain he was about to die. When he made a random jump to a system that his chart said was empty, it was not empty. There was a city below him, a human city, New Carthage, gleaming with lights on the dark surface of a frozen world, surrounded by the busy traffic of cargo shuttles and mining vessels. Rethus stared at it through his viewport with his scales cycling through every shade of blue that meant astonishment. Two human corvettes appeared beside his ship before he could react. They were fast, small, and very obviously armed. Rethus expected to die. Instead, a human voice came through his communication system, speaking in accented but understandable trade common. "Unknown vessel, you have entered sovereign space. State your name and intentions." "I am Tradeclaw Rethus of the Sorathi Free Merchants," Rethus said, her trying very hard not to sound as terrified as he was. "I am fleeing pirates. My ship is damaged. I mean no harm." There was a pause, then the voice said, "Follow us in. We will see to your ship." They brought him down to the surface. They repaired his engine. They gave him food, which was strange but edible. They patched his hull. They treated a wound on his arm that he had gotten during the pirate attack and had not mentioned. They asked him questions about where he had come from and what he knew about the region, and they answered some of his questions in return, though not all of them. Rethus was not a fool. He understood immediately what he was looking at. These were humans, the species that the Council had locked behind a barrier wall 50 years ago. The species that was supposed to be trapped in its own solar system, slowly declining into irrelevance. They were not trapped. They were here. They had a city. They had ships. They had technology he did not recognize. And they were, as far as he could tell, thriving. When his ship was repaired and he was ready to leave, Governor Vasquez came to see him personally. She was a compact woman with dark skin and gray-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. She stood in front of him and studied him with the directness that Rethus would come to learn was typical of humans. "You have seen something that no one in the galaxy knows about," she said. "I am not going to threaten you. That is not how we do things. But I am going to ask you to keep this secret, at least for now. We are not ready to be found." "Why did you help me?" Rethus asked. "You could have destroyed my ship. No one would have known." Vasquez looked at him with an expression he could not read. "Because you needed help," she said, "and because where we come from, that is reason enough." Rethus left New Carthage with a repaired ship, a full cargo hold of supplies the humans had given him as a gift, and a head full of thoughts that would not let him sleep for a week. He kept the secret for about 3 months. It was not that Rethus was untrustworthy. He was, in fact, one of the most honest Sorathi merchants in the business, which was part of the reason he was not very successful. The problem was that he was not the only Sorathi who was struggling. The Sorathi as a species were struggling. They had been members of the Galactic Council for 2,000 years, and in all that time, they had never been treated as anything more than useful servants. The big species, the Thorellans and the Melkari and the Kreth, made the decisions. The small species, like the Sorathi, followed along and were grateful for whatever scraps they received. Rethus had family. He had friends. He had an entire community of fellow merchants who were barely surviving in a galaxy that did not value them. And he had just discovered a new civilization on the edge of known space that had treated him with more kindness in a single day than the Council had shown his people in 2,000 years. He told his cousin first, then his cousin told a friend. Then that friend told someone else. Within 3 months, a small but growing number of Sorathi merchants knew about the humans. Within 6 months, the first Sorathi trading vessel arrived at New Carthage, requesting permission to trade. Admiral Okonkwo was not happy about this, but he was a practical man, and he recognized an opportunity when he saw one. The diaspora needed things that could only be found in Council space: star charts, information about galactic politics and military deployments. Rare elements that were abundant in developed systems but scarce on the frontier. The Sorathi could provide all of these things. In return, humanity could offer the Sorathi something they had never had before: respect. The trade relationship started small and grew quickly. Sorathi merchants brought star charts and intelligence. Humans provided advanced materials, medical technology, and something even more valuable: a market where the Sorathi were treated as equal partners rather than second-class suppliers. For the first time in their history, the Sorathi were doing business with a species that did not look down on them. And the Sorathi were not the only ones. The galaxy was full of species that the Council treated badly. The Velith were silicon-based beings who lived in deep space, far from any star. The council considered them barely civilized. The Umari were an aquatic species whose underwater technology was extraordinarily advanced, but whose voices were never heard in council debates because they could not survive in the air-filled chambers where decisions were made. The Neth were a fungal collective intelligence that the council had classified as non-sentient for 800 years despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. One by one, these species found their way to the diaspora. Some came through Sarathi contacts. Some came because rumors had spread through the neglected corners of the galaxy about a new power on the frontier, a species that built cities on death worlds and treated everyone it met with fairness. Some came because they had nowhere else to go. Humanity welcomed them all. This was the thing that surprised the galaxy most when it eventually learned the truth. It was not the slipspace drive or the warships or the colony worlds. It was the fact that humanity, a species that had been exiled and abandoned and left to die, had responded not with bitterness, but with open hands. They did not hoard their technology. They did not demand submission. They asked only for friendship and fair trade, and they gave back more than they received. A shadow alliance formed. It had no official name and no formal structure. It was simply a growing network of species who traded with the diaspora, shared information, and began to think of each other as partners rather than strangers. At its center were the humans, not because they demanded to lead, but because everyone else kept looking to them for guidance. Meanwhile, in the deep systems that the diaspora had designated as military zones, the warship production continued. Von Neumann machines ate asteroids and turned them into corvettes. Training programs turned colonists into soldiers. The fleet grew from 200 ships to 500, then to 1,000, then to 2,000. Every ship was equipped with a slip space drive, autonomous repair systems, and weapons that had been designed by humans who had spent 50 years with nothing to do but think about how to fight a galactic empire. And the council heard whispers. At first, the whispers were easy to ignore. The frontier was always full of strange stories. Pirates, smugglers, and drifters saw things that were not there all the time. But the whispers kept coming, and they kept getting more specific. Strange ships that appeared out of nowhere and vanished again. Colonies on worlds that should have been empty. A new species, or maybe an old one, building something in the dark. Over mind, Kelvithus heard the whispers and dismissed them. The barrier wall was the most advanced piece of technology in the galaxy. No species had ever broken through one. Certainly not the humans, who had been crude and primitive even before their exile. The whispers were nothing. Background noise, not worth investigating. This was the Overmind's first mistake. Much the second mistake came when a Thorellan scout patrol entered a system on the far edge of the frontier. The system was supposed to be empty. It was not. There was a human mining operation in the asteroid belt, 3 cargo ships, and a processing platform, pulling metal out of rock and loading it into containers. The scout patrol consisted of 2 Thorellan frigates. They were not large ships, but they were well armed and crewed by experienced soldiers. The patrol commander sent a message to the mining operation demanding identification. The response came not from the mining ships, but from 4 points in empty space around the Thorellan frigates. 4 human corvettes dropped out of slip space simultaneously, appearing so close that the Thorellan sensors barely had time to register them before they were already in weapons range. A human voice came through the communication channel. It was calm, polite, and absolutely certain of itself. Thorellan vessels, you have entered sovereign human space. You are not authorized to be here. You may leave peacefully, and we encourage you to do so. You will not be given a second offer. The voice belonged to Fleet Admiral Idris Okonkwo. He was sitting in the command chair of his flagship, a corvette named Silent Thunder, watching the 2 Thorellan frigates on his tactical display. He was 68 years old, his hair was white, and his hands were steady on the armrests of his chair. The Thorellan commander was experienced enough to recognize a losing position when he saw one. 4 ships at point-blank range using technology he had never seen before. He ordered his frigates to withdraw. They turned and ran. And the human corvettes watched them go. Okonkwo sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. Beside him, his tactical officer, a young woman named Chen, looked at him with wide eyes. "They will report this," she said. "Yes, Okonkwo said. "The council will know we are here." "Yes." "What do we do?" Okonkwo looked at the stars on the display. Somewhere out there, 400 species were about to learn that the humans they had locked away and forgotten were not only free, but had been building an empire in the darkness right under their noses. "We get ready," he said quietly, "because what comes next will be the fight of our lives." He paused and then he smiled. It was a tired smile, but there was something in it that was hard and bright, like sunlight on steel. "But we have been getting ready for a long time. On 47 colony worlds, in shipyards and factories and training grounds, humanity heard the news and understood what it meant. The time for hiding was over. The time for whispers was over. The galaxy was about to find out what happened when you locked the most stubborn species in the universe inside a cage for 50 years and then let it out. The ghost tide was about to become a flood. The message arrived at the Grand Convocation Chamber on Valtheris Prime at midday, Galactic Standard Time, and it destroyed the most powerful political body in the galaxy's peace of mind in less than 30 seconds. It was a simple message. A Thorellan scout patrol had encountered human ships, not inside the barrier wall, outside it, on the frontier. The humans had warships, advanced technology, air-cannon colonies. The barrier wall had been breached. The humans were free. For the first time in anyone's memory, the convocation chamber was silent. Not the polite, ordered silence that preceded debate, a stunned, airless silence. The silence of 400 species trying to process something that should have been impossible. Overmind Kelvithus processed it faster than most. The Thorellan hive mind was, above all else, efficient. Within minutes of receiving the report, the Overmind had accessed every scrap of intelligence about the frontier, reviewed every dismissed rumor, every ignored sighting, every strange report that had been filed and forgotten over the past 20 years. The pattern was obvious now. The humans had not just escaped. They had been out there for decades, building, growing, Ashin spreading through the galaxy like roots through soil, right under the Council's collective nose. Kelvithus felt something that the hive mind had not experienced in over 1,000 years. It took the Overmind several seconds to identify the emotion because it was so unfamiliar. It was embarrassment. The Overmind crushed the feeling immediately. There was no time for such things. The situation was clear. A species that the Council had sentenced to permanent isolation had broken free using technology the Council did not possess. That species now controlled an unknown number of systems, had an unknown number of ships, and had been forming alliances with disaffected Council members. This was not an inconvenience. This was a threat to the entire galactic order. Kelvithus convened an emergency session of the Council. The debate lasted 4 days. Some species argued for negotiation. Perhaps the humans could still be brought into compliance. Perhaps the situation could be resolved peacefully. Others pointed out that the humans had already been offered compliance once and had chosen exile instead. A species that stubborn was unlikely to change its mind. The Thorellan position was simple and direct. The humans had to be stopped, not negotiated with, not reasoned with, stopped. If they were allowed to continue expanding, if their technology spread, if their ideas about freedom and independence infected more species, the Council's authority would collapse. 12,000 years of galactic order would fall apart. The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. The Council authorized a purification fleet. 10,000 warships drawn from 12 species, led by the Thorellan hegemony. Their mission was equally decisive. Find the human colonies, destroy the human fleet, force humanity back behind the barrier wall, or, if that proved impossible, destroy them entirely. The fleet assembled at Cathera Station, a massive military complex at the edge of Council space closest to the frontier. It was the largest military force the galaxy had seen in 3,000 years. Thorellan dreadnoughts, each one 5 kilometers long and bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's crust. Melkari swift ships, elegant and deadly. Kreth battle fortresses, slow but nearly indestructible. Urathi gas weapon carriers. And ships from 8 other species, all of them eager to prove their loyalty to the Council and their value in the coming fight. At the head of the fleet, to aboard the dreadnought Absolute Certainty, Overmind Kelvithus directed operations personally. This was unusual. Overminds did not typically involve themselves in military matters, but this was not a typical military matter. This was about the survival of everything the Council had built. Kelvithus would not trust it to anyone else. The fleet moved toward the frontier. It traveled through the Council's FTL lane network, a procession of warships so vast that it took 6 hours for the entire fleet to pass through a single transit point. Ahead of them, scout ships mapped the route and searched for human positions. They did not find much. That should have worried them more than it did. Admiral Okonkwo got the news 3 days before the purification fleet reached the diaspora's borders. A Sarathi intelligence network, one of many that Rethus had helped build over the years, detected the fleet's departure from Cathera Station and sent word through back channels. Okonkwo assembled his commanders aboard the Defiance, the flagship that Director Aride had commissioned 2 decades ago. It was not the largest ship in the fleet. It was not even particularly impressive looking, but it was fast, tough, and equipped with the most advanced slip space drive in the human arsenal. The briefing was short. Okonkwo was not a man who wasted words. 10,000 ships, he said, displaying the intelligence on the tactical table. 12 species. The Thyrellans are leading with their dreadnoughts, which are the main threat. Each one carries enough firepower to sterilize a continent. They are also slow, rely on centralized command through the hive mind, and their point defense systems are designed to counter threats that come through normal space, not slip space. He looked around the table at his commanders. There were 40 of them, representing the diaspora's full combat fleet. Some were young, some were old. All of them had spent their lives training for a fight they had hoped would never come. "We have 2,000 ships," Okonkwo said. "We are outnumbered 5-1. In a straight fight, we lose, so we are not going to have a straight fight." He outlined the strategy. It was built on the single advantage that humanity possessed and that the Council did not understand: the slip space drive. Every human ship could jump anywhere in real time, not through fixed lanes, not along predicted routes. Anywhere. This meant that standard fleet tactics, formations, firing solutions, to defensive screens, none of it worked against human ships. You could not predict where they would appear. You could not set up a firing line against an enemy that might materialize behind you. You could not coordinate a fleet when the opponent could be everywhere and nowhere at once. Okonkwo had studied every naval battle in human history, from Salamis to Midway to the orbital engagements of the early space age. He had studied every recorded galactic battle as well, using intelligence gathered by Sarathi spies. He had identified a consistent pattern in Council military thinking. They fought in formations. They relied on coordination from a central command. They expected their enemies to do the same. Humanity was going to fight like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. The Purification Fleet arrived at the Cathera Rift, in a stretch of relatively empty space on the border between Council territory and the diaspora, and found the human fleet waiting for them. 2,000 human ships hung in space in a loose, apparently disorganized cluster. No formation, no defensive screen, no obvious command structure. To the Council commanders, it looked like chaos. It looked like amateurs. Kelvithus ordered the attack. The Thyrellan dreadnoughts advanced in a standard assault formation, a wall of heavy ships with lighter vessels screening the flanks. Behind them, the Melkari swift ships prepared for flanking maneuvers. The Kreth battle fortresses lumbered forward to anchor the center. It was textbook. It was practiced. It had worked against every enemy the Council had faced in 12,000 years. The first wave of Thyrellan weapons fire tore through the space where the human fleet had been. But the human fleet was no longer there. 2,000 ships blinked out of existence simultaneously. For exactly 1.7 seconds, the Council fleet's sensors showed nothing. Empty space. Then 2,000 ships blinked back into existence, scattered throughout the Council formation. Inside it, among the dreadnoughts, between the escorts, behind the flagships, and they opened fire. The effect was devastating. Council ships that had been expecting to face an enemy at long range suddenly found human corvettes at point-blank distance, pouring weapons fire into their hulls from angles that their shields were not designed to cover. The corvettes did not stay in one place. They fired, jumped, appeared somewhere else, fired again. Each one operated independently, its crew making split-second decisions without waiting for orders from a central command. 2,000 captains, each one thinking for themselves, each one finding opportunities and exploiting them in real time. The Council fleet's coordination collapsed within minutes. The Thyrolan hive mind tried to adapt, sending new orders to every ship simultaneously. But the hive mind was designed for situations where it could process information and make decisions faster than any individual. It was not designed for a situation where 2,000 enemies were appearing and disappearing at random, where the tactical situation changed every second, where there was no pattern to predict and no formation to counter. Human electronic warfare made it worse. Jamming systems, designed during 50 years of isolation specifically to target Council communication frequencies, flooded the battlefield with noise. Ship-to-ship communications degraded. Sensor readings became unreliable. The coordination that was the Council fleet's greatest strength dissolved into confusion. Okonkwo directed the battle from the Defiance, but he did not micromanage. He could not have, even if he wanted to. The human fleet's strength was its independence. Each ship, each captain, each crew made its own decisions. Okonkwo set the overall strategy, identified priority targets, and trusted his people to do the rest. And they did. The Thyrolan dreadnoughts, for all their enormous firepower, were slow and designed for long-range combat. Human corvettes danced around them like insects around giants, striking at engines, sensor arrays, shore and weapon systems. One by one, the great ships were blinded and crippled. They were not destroyed quickly. Dreadnoughts were hard to kill, but a blind, crippled dreadnought was no longer a threat. It was an obstacle. The Melkari swift ships were faster and more adaptable, and they put up a harder fight. But they relied on the FTL lane network for rapid repositioning. Human ships did not need lanes. Every time a Melkari squadron jumped to a new position, human corvettes were already there, waiting, having jumped through slip space to the same coordinates seconds earlier. The Kreth battle fortresses were nearly indestructible, but they were also incredibly slow. Human ships simply ignored them, flowing around them like water around rocks, and focused on the more vulnerable targets. The battle raged for 6 hours. It felt like 600. And when it was over, the Council fleet had lost 3,800 ships, destroyed, crippled, or so badly damaged that they were unable to fight. The human fleet had lost 340. Every human loss hurt. Okonkwo felt each one like a wound, but the numbers were staggering, and both sides knew what they meant. The Council fleet retreated. It was not an orderly withdrawal. It was a scramble. Thousands of damaged ships fighting to reach the nearest FTL lane and escape. The humans let them go. Okonkwo had given strict orders on that point. No pursuit, no killing of ships that were running. Humanity was not here to slaughter. It was here to win. The aftermath was felt across the galaxy within days. The Council had not just lost a battle. It had lost the idea that it was unbeatable. For 12,000 years, no species had challenged the Council's military and won. The Purification Fleet was supposed to have been overwhelming. It was supposed to have crushed the humans and restored order. Instead, a species that had been exiled and forgotten had shattered the largest fleet in 3 millennia, with a force 1/5 its size. The effect on the Council's member species was immediate and profound. Species that had been quietly unhappy with the Council for centuries suddenly found their courage. The Sorathi declared their alliance with humanity openly, pulling their merchant fleets out of Council trade routes and redirecting them to the diaspora. The Velith, who had been neutral in the conflict, announced that they would block Thyrolan supply lines through their deep space territories. The Umari, who controlled the underwater data relay networks that half the galaxy's communications depended on, shut down those relays in all systems bordering the frontier. And they were not the only ones. The Neth, the fungal intelligence that the Council had classified as non-sentient, sent a delegation to New Carthage and offered an alliance. 3 other minor species followed within a week. A dozen more began quiet negotiations through Sorathi intermediaries. The Council was not just losing a military conflict, it was losing its grip on the galaxy. On the bridge of the absolute certainty, Overmind Chelvitus processed the data from the defeat and felt that unfamiliar emotion again. Not embarrassment this time. Something worse. Something that the Thorellan hive mind had truly never experienced in its 12,000-year existence. Doubt. And Admiral Okonkwo did not give the galaxy time to recover. Within 2 weeks of the Battle of Cathara Rift, the human fleet, reinforced by Sarathi cruisers and Velith crystal ships, began advancing toward the heart of Council space. Not in a straight line. Not through the FTL lanes that the Council could monitor and defend. Through slip space, appearing in system after system without warning, bypassing every defensive position the Council tried to establish. They did not attack civilian targets. They did not bomb planets or destroy infrastructure. They disabled military installations, knocked out weapons platforms, and moved on. In every system they entered, they broadcast a single message. We are not here to conquer you. We are not here to harm you. And we are here because the Galactic Council decided 50 years ago that humanity did not deserve to be free. They were wrong about that, and they were wrong about all of you. The message spread, and with it spread something that the Council had worked very hard to suppress for 12,000 years. Hope. The advance continued for 3 months. System by system, the human-led fleet pushed closer to the center of the galaxy, closer to the seat of the Council itself. Some systems resisted, most did not. On many worlds, the local populations watched the human ships arrive with something between relief and wonder. These were the humans, the exiles, the species that was supposed to be dead or broken. They were neither, and they were strong and calm, and they treated everyone they encountered with a respect that many of these species had never received from the Council. The final jump brought the fleet to Valtheris Prime. 2,000 human warships dropped out of slip space in perfect formation around the Council's seat of power. Behind them came 300 Sarathi cruisers, their hulls gleaming with new armor plated with human composites. 100 Velith crystal ships, beautiful and strange, their translucent bodies catching the light of the neutron star. And ships from a dozen other species, all of them flying alongside humanity for the first time. At the center of the fleet, small and unarmed and completely alone, was a single diplomatic shuttle. Inside the shuttle, a woman who was 102 years old put on a set of credentials that she had not worn in 76 years. The credentials were old. The pin was tarnished. The lanyard was frayed. But the name on them was still readable. Ambassador Ilara Voss, United Earth Coalition. Voss looked at herself in the small mirror in the shuttle's cabin. She was old. Her hair was white. Her face was lined with decades of worry and work and laughter. But her eyes were the same sharp brown they had always been. And when she straightened her shoulders, she stood the same way she had stood 76 years ago on that small circle of light. She had been young then. She had been afraid. She was still afraid, if she was honest. But she had learned something in 76 years that she had not fully understood when she was young. Fear did not matter. What mattered was what you did with it. She activated the shuttle's communication system and sent a message to the Grand Convocation Chamber. It was a short message, polite, formal, the kind of message that diplomats had been sending to each other for as long as there had been diplomats. This is Ambassador Ilara Voss of the United Earth Coalition. I believe I have a standing invitation to address the chamber. I would like to accept that invitation now. On the bridge of the Defiance, Admiral Okonkwo watched the shuttle move toward the station and allowed himself a small, quiet smile. The galaxy was about to change, and it was going to change because one stubborn old woman had decided, 76 years ago, that some things were worth fighting for. He just hoped it would be enough. The Grand Convocation Chamber looked exactly the same as it had 76 years ago. The same towering rows of seats rising up into the darkness. The same cold alien lights. The same echoing silence that made even the smallest sound feel enormous. The same 400 species sitting in their designated sections, looking down from their high places at the single circle of white light at the very bottom of the room. Ilara Voss stepped onto that circle of light and felt the years fall away. She was 102 years old. Human life extension technology, developed during the long decades of exile, had kept her body functional, but it had not made her young. Her bones ached. Her hands trembled slightly if she did not concentrate on keeping them still. She walked with a cane that she had refused to bring into the chamber. Way because she would be damned if she was going to lean on anything in front of this audience. She stood straight. She folded her hands in front of her. She looked up at the 400 species that filled the chamber from floor to ceiling, and she waited. The last time she had been here, they had looked at her with contempt, with pity, with the comfortable certainty of beings who held all the power and knew it. Now they looked at her with something very different. They looked at her with fear. Good, Voss thought, not because she wanted them to be afraid, but because fear meant they were paying attention, and they needed to pay attention to what she was about to say. The chamber was not entirely the same, she noticed. Some of the seats were empty. The Sarathi section was dark. They were not here as council members anymore, and they were outside in human ships as allies. The Velith section was empty too, and the Umari section, and a scattering of seats from a dozen other species who had left the council in the weeks following the Battle of Cathara Rift. The chamber that had once been full to overflowing now had gaps in it, like a mouth with missing teeth. At the very top of the chamber, in the largest and highest section, the Thorellan hegemony sat in silence. Thousands of insectoid bodies motionless, their green eyes glowing in the dark. One mind, watching through many eyes. Overmind Kelvithus did not speak. It waited. The protocol master, a Jalindri official whose species had managed the council's ceremony since before humans had learned to use fire, activated the translation system and spoke the formal words. The chamber recognizes Ambassador Alara Voss of the human species. The ambassador may address the council. Thank you, Voss said. Her voice was rough with age, but it was strong. The chamber's acoustics caught it and carried it to every seat. It has been a long time since I stood in this room. 76 years. I was younger then. The galaxy was different then. Or perhaps it was not different at all, and I simply did not understand it as well as I do now. She paused. She looked up at the rows of alien faces. 76 years ago, I came here to ask for something simple. I came to ask for membership, for a seat at this table, for the right to participate in the community of civilizations that called itself the Galactic Council. I was told no. I was told that my species was too violent, too individualistic, too unpredictable, too human. She let that word hang in the air. I was offered an alternative, the compliance protocols, neural harmonization, a guidance cast to watch over us, 500 years of supervised domestication, at the end of which our application for membership would be reconsidered, not approved. Reconsidered. She shook her head slowly. I refused. This council knows that. This council remembers what happened next. You sealed us behind a barrier wall. You cut us off from the galaxy. You left us alone in our own solar system with nothing but our own resources and our own minds. You expected us to suffer. You expected us to weaken. You expected us to come crawling back, ready to accept whatever terms you offered. Some of you, I think, expected us to die. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Not even the species that communicated through light or vibration made a sound. We did not die, Voss said. We did not crawl. We did not kneel. Instead, we did what humans have always done when they are pushed into a corner. We adapted. We invented. We built. We took the prison you gave us and we turned it into a workshop. We studied the barrier wall you built to contain us, and we learned more about the physics of space-time from that wall than your scientists had learned in 12,000 years. And then we broke through it. She took a step forward, just one step. But in that enormous room, on that small circle of light, it felt like an earthquake. We built colonies on worlds you had thrown away. We made homes in places you said nothing could live. We found allies among the species you had ignored and mistreated and forgotten. And when you sent 10,000 warships to destroy us, we broke them. Not because we are stronger than you, not because we are smarter, but because we are free. Because every single human being in that fleet was fighting with their own mind, their own courage, their own judgment. Because you cannot defeat a species that does not need a hive mind or a central command or a set of protocols to tell it what to do. You cannot defeat a species that thinks for itself. Her voice had risen. She paused and brought it back down. When she spoke again, It was quieter, gentler, and somehow that made it hit harder. But I did not come here to gloat. I did not come here to threaten. I did not come here to demand your surrender, because that is not who we are. And that, I think, is the part you never understood about us. She looked up at the Thyrellan section. Thousands of green eyes looked back at her. You looked at our history and you saw the wars, the cruelty, the destruction. You saw a species that fought among itself, and you concluded that we were dangerous. And you were right. We are dangerous. But you only saw half the picture. You did not see the other half. You did not see the treaties we signed after the wars. You did not see the cities we rebuilt from rubble. You did not see the strangers who helped each other in floods and earthquakes and famines. You did not see the hands that reached out across borders and oceans and battlefields to offer help to people who had been enemies the day before. She paused again. You saw our violence. You did not see our compassion. And our compassion is the strongest thing about us. Stronger than our stubbornness, stronger than our anger, stronger even than our pride. Because at the end of the day, when the fighting is done and the dust settles, humans do not want to rule. We want to help. We want to build. We want to connect. We want to look at a stranger and see a neighbor. She straightened her back. Her old bones protested. She ignored them. So here is what I have come to say. I have not come to demand the surrender of this council. I have come to propose its replacement, not with a human empire, not with a new hierarchy, with something better. Something that this galaxy has never tried in 12,000 years of civilization. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a thin data tablet. It was small and plain and looked utterly insignificant in her wrinkled hand. I am proposing the compact of open stars. The details are on this device, and I will share them with every delegation in this chamber. But the core principles are simple. She held up one finger. First, no species will ever again be forced into compliance. Neural harmonization will be banned. Every species in this galaxy has the right to think its own thoughts and make its own choices, and that right is not negotiable. A second finger. Second, all barrier walls everywhere in the galaxy will be dismantled. No species will ever again be caged. The stars belong to everyone. A third finger. Third, trade and travel between all systems will be free and open. No more controlled lanes, no more restricted access. Where the galaxy is too big and too beautiful to be divided into territories and kept behind fences. A fourth finger. Fourth, this council, as it currently exists, will dissolve. In its place, we propose the Assembly of Free Worlds. Participation will be voluntary. Decisions will be made by consensus, not by the dictates of whichever species happens to be the oldest or the strongest. Every voice will carry equal weight. Every species, from the greatest to the smallest, will have a seat. She lowered her hand. And fifth, humanity will not lead this assembly. We will participate in it. We will contribute to it. We will defend it if it is threatened. But we will not rule it. We have seen what happens when one species decides it knows what is best for everyone else. We have been on the receiving end of that decision. And we will not make the same mistake. The chamber stirred. Murmurs rippled through the rows. Species whispered to each other in languages that the translation system caught and turned into a low hum of noise. Voss waited. She had said what she needed to say. Now it was time to listen. The first to speak was the Melkari delegate. The tall, glass-like being rose from its seat and spoke in that same flat, translated voice that Voss remembered from 76 years ago. You have the power to take whatever you want. Your fleet surrounds this station. You could destroy us. Why offer terms? Voss looked up at the Melkari and answered simply, because destroying you would make us exactly what you accused us of being, and we spent 76 years proving you wrong. We are not going to undo that now. The Melkari stared at her for a long moment. Then it sat down without another word. Others spoke. Some were hostile, some were skeptical, some were cautiously supportive, a few were openly grateful. The Jalindrai delegate, ancient beyond measure, said that in all its long existence, it had never heard a proposal quite like this one. It did not say whether that was good or bad. Through all of it, Kelvidas said nothing. The overmind sat at the top of the chamber, processing. The hive mind was running calculations at a speed that no individual being could match. Military projections, political scenarios, economic models, alliance patterns, every possible outcome of every possible response. The calculations were clear. The Tharellan hegemony was still powerful. Its fleet was damaged but not destroyed. Its industrial base was intact. It could fight another war. But the cost would be catastrophic. The alliance forming around humanity was growing stronger every day. Species that had been loyal to the Council for millennia were wavering. A prolonged war would not restore the old order. It would destroy whatever was left of it. There was another factor in the calculations, one that the Overmind had difficulty quantifying. The humans had won the battle at Cathera Rift. They had advanced to the very heart of the Council's power. They had every reason to demand unconditional surrender. And instead, their ambassador was standing on that small circle of light, offering partnership. Kelvitus had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years by understanding power. Power was simple. The strong commanded. The weak obeyed. That was the natural order. That was how civilizations function. And the humans did not seem to understand this. Or perhaps they understood it perfectly and had decided to reject it. The Overmind was not sure which possibility was more disturbing. The debate in the chamber continued for hours. Voss stood through all of it, on her old legs on that small circle of light. She did not sit, she did not complain. She answered every question with patience and clarity. She did not raise her voice. She did not make threats. She was in every way exactly what she appeared to be, an old woman who had come a very long way to say something important. Finally, when the other voices had exhausted themselves, Kelvithus spoke. The chamber went silent instantly. When the Overmind spoke, everyone listened. That at least had not changed. "Ambassador Voss," the Overmind said. Its translated voice was the same cold, a precise instrument it had always been. 76 years ago, I told you that your species was unfit for galactic civilization. I told you that you were violent, fractured, and dangerously unpredictable. I remember, Voss said. I was correct in my assessment, Kelvithus said. A ripple went through the chamber. You are violent. You are fractured. You are dangerously unpredictable. These are not opinions. They are facts supported by your own history and by the events of the past 76 years. Voss said nothing. She waited. However, the Overmind continued, and there was something in its voice that had never been there before, something that sounded almost reluctant. I did not account for the possibility that these qualities might also be strengths. When I did not predict that a species locked in isolation would use that isolation to surpass the technology of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. I did not predict that a species known for internal conflict would unite with such purpose. I did not predict that a species offered the chance to dominate would instead offer to share. The Overmind paused. 10,000 green eyes blinked in the darkness. You are not what we predicted, Kelvithus said. Voss looked up at the Overmind. She was tired. She was so tired. 76 years of carrying this weight on her shoulders, and it was almost over. She allowed herself a small smile. We never are, she said. The silence that followed lasted exactly 11 seconds. Voss counted them. Each one felt like a year. The Tharellan hegemony, Kelvithus said at last. Yes, we'll accept the compact of open stars. We will participate in the assembly of free worlds, as equals. The last word came out hard, as if it cost the Overmind something to say it. Perhaps it did. 12,000 years of supremacy ended in a single word. Kelvithus was not happy. This was not friendship. This was not warmth. This was the cold, clear recognition of a new reality by a mind that was above all else practical. The chamber erupted. 400 species, some cheering, some wailing, some flickering with light, some vibrating with sound. The noise was incredible. It shook the walls and rattled the floor and filled the enormous room from top to bottom with the combined voices of a galaxy in transformation. Voss stood in the middle of it all, on her circle of light, and let the sound wash over her. It was done. The hours that followed were a blur of formalities and ceremonies and negotiations over details. The compact of open stars was ratified by 312 species before the day was over. The remaining species asked for time to consider, which was granted. The Assembly of Free Worlds was established with a provisional charter that would be refined over the coming months. Humanity took a rotating seat on the Assembly's Coordinating Council, one voice among many, just as Voss had promised. The barrier walls came down, not just the one around Seoul, but all of them. There were 11 in total scattered across the galaxy, each one sealing away a species that the Council had deemed too troublesome. When the walls collapsed, the species behind them stumbled out into the light, blinking and confused and free. But human ships were waiting for each one, ready to help, ready to explain, ready to welcome them into a galaxy that was finally, tentatively, learning to be something better than it had been. Human slip space technology was shared openly, not sold, not licensed, shared. Within a year, the first non-human slip space drives were being built in Sarathi shipyards and Velith deep space stations. The lane network that had controlled galactic travel for millennia did not disappear overnight, but it was no longer the only option. Species that had been trapped in remote corners of the galaxy, unable to reach the nearest lane, suddenly had access to everywhere. The galaxy, which had been a carefully controlled grid, became a web, and then it became something even more. It became open. It was not a perfect transition. There were disputes. There were conflicts. Old hatreds did not vanish overnight. Some species resented the changes. Some resisted them. The Thorellan hegemony remained cold and distant, participating in the assembly, but never warming to it. There were moments when it seemed like the whole thing might fall apart, but it held. It held because every time there was a crisis, every time there was a dispute, every time someone suggested that maybe the old way had been better, there were humans and Sarathi and Velith and Umari and a dozen other species who stepped forward and said no. Not better. Different. And different was not the same as better. Freedom was messy. Freedom was hard. But freedom was the only thing that let every species in the galaxy become what it was meant to be. On the evening after the compact was signed, after the ceremonies were done, and the dignitaries had gone, and the chamber was empty, Ilara Voss stood alone on the observation deck of Valtheris Station and looked out at the stars. She was exhausted. Every part of her body hurt. She wanted nothing more than to sit down, close her eyes, and sleep for about 100 years. But she could not bring herself to leave this view. The stars were different from here than they were from Earth. Brighter, closer, more of them than she could count. A galaxy spread out before her like a blanket made of light. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. Tradeclaw Rethus walked toward her across the observation deck. He was old now, too, for a Sarathi. His scales had faded from bright green to a soft gray-green, and he moved more slowly than he once had. But his eyes were still sharp. When he saw her, his scales flickered with the warm amber pattern that Voss had learned over many years meant affection. "Ambassador," he said. "Rethus," she said, "I thought you would be celebrating with the others." "I was, but I wanted to find you first." He came to stand beside her at the viewport. "I wanted to thank you." "Thank me? For what?" "For this." He gestured at the stars, at the station, at everything. "For all of this. When I found your people on New Carthage, I was a failed merchant running from pirates. You fed me. You fixed my ship. You asked for nothing in return. I did not understand it then. I think I understand it now." Voss smiled. "What do you understand?" "That it was never about strength for you. Not really. Not even the fleet or the technology or the slip space drive. Those were tools. The real thing, the thing that changed the galaxy, was simpler than that. You treated everyone you met as if they mattered, as if their freedom was as important as your own, as if the galaxy was big enough for all of us." Voss was quiet for a moment. She looked out at the stars and her eyes were bright. "Do you want to know what I'm thinking?" she asked. "Always. I am thinking about a day 76 years ago. I stood in that chamber down there, on that little circle of light, and 400 species told me that humanity was not welcome among the stars, that we were too wild, too stubborn, too human." She paused. "They were right about that last part." She turned to Rethus and she grinned. It was not the dignified smile of an ambassador or the measured expression of a diplomat. It was a real grin, and wide and bright and full of something that Rethus had seen on human faces 1,000 times, but had never quite found a word for in his own language. Joy, yes. Pride, certainly. But something more than that. Something fiercer. Something that burned like a star. And it was the best thing about us all along, she said. Rethus looked at this old human woman, standing in front of a galaxy she had helped to free, grinning like she had just pulled off the greatest trick in history. And he laughed. He laughed until his scales turned the bright gold color that meant pure happiness. And Voss laughed with him, and for a moment the two of them were just two old friends standing in front of the stars, laughing at the absurdity and the beauty and the impossible wonder of it all. Below them, the grand convocation chamber stood empty and dark. It would never be used again in quite the same way. Above them, the stars burned on, as they always had, as they always would. And between those stars, on 1,000 worlds and 1,000,000 ships, beings of every shape and size and kind were waking up to a new day in a galaxy that was, for the first time in 12,000 years, truly free. They had exiled humanity to teach it obedience. Instead, they had taught it to be unstoppable, and the galaxy was better for it.